Another area where pivot tables differ than Excel worksheets is that they do not recalculate automatically. Now, pivot tables function based on a snapshot in time of our data. When we first created the pivot table, Excel took a picture of our original data, and when we're manipulating the pivot table, it's basing it off of that picture that it took. That's what's referred to as the pivot table cache. So there's a hidden area of the worksheet where Excel stores this copy of our data, which then means that if we make a change to the source data, unlike when we're working with formulas, we're not going to see the results recalculate automatically. So that brings us to the term in Excel we need to know for pivot tables. It's called refreshing. So if we go to our first pivot table tools menu, we'll see that there is a refresh command. So if in the case of step 1, I'd gone to a particular vendor and zeroed out their sales, if I then turned to the source data tab, or the pivot table tab, it would not have recalculated yet, because that's not a behavior of pivot tables. So instead what I need to do is use that refresh command. I can also right click on the pivot table and choose refresh as well. That would then update the pivot table, and then I would then see that change take effect. When your cursor is inside the drill down worksheet on this design menu, it's going to say table tools above it. Total rows shows up right there. That's where we need to be. It is easy to get confused with the pivot table design menu. You will not see a total row command on that. What we were talking about was the total row for tables, which are a list of data. So make sure it says table tools above the design menu. There in the middle, you will then find the total row. You can then add these amounts to it if we wish. So let's say that there's some question about middle Georgia fruit sales, and so we're going to zero out their sales and not include them this time. So back to my data, I'm first going to sort the data in alphabetical order so I can locate that vendor. So here's Middle Georgia Fruit, and I'll just select their sales. I'm going to type a 0, and then if I hold down the Control key and press Enter, that is going to put a 0 in all the cells that I highlight. So that's a quick way that I can overwrite data, is by selecting those cells, typing something, pressing Control Enter as opposed to just Enter, overwrites those values. Now what I would expect is to see that Middle Georgia Fruit would have zeroed out. Because for instance, if I'm doing formulas, so I have 1,000, I have 2,000, I use the auto sum command, and then so I come back along here and I change that to 5,000, well then that formula recalculated automatically. Well, I can tinker with the data on the fruit sales tab to my heart's delight. It's never going to update the pivot table until I refresh the pivot table. So if we go to the first pivot table tools menu, there is a refresh command. We click on that, and then finally the data updates. So very important takeaway, remember we always have to refresh our pivot tables periodically to have it reflect the changes in our data.